Welcome to how to add FDC3 to your apps. And of course, our first question is, what is FDC3? I know a lot of you guys have come and visited us at the booth, so you're going to hear the same thing again. But FDC3 is the open source standard for financial application interoperability. So that just means that we want applications to talk to each other, but we also want to make sure those applications understand each other when they talk to each other. So FDC3 helps standardize what those communication messages should look like so that when one app says one thing, the other app understands what they meant. And this is usually about some very specific, very limited pieces of information, which is how we can get everyone to agree on just these tiny little bits of JSON. And I'll be showing you a little bit about that later. But first, what kinds of data are we sharing and how are we sharing it? So you can choose between sharing with every app on the same channel. So in this case, this picture, we have red channels and yellow channels, and just an app that's not on any channel in particular. And so you could say everything that's red, everything that's yellow get the same piece of information. Or we can say one app wants to share with one other particular app. Now what I find, because I've been doing FDC3 for 3 years, I built demo apps as part of working for a desktop agent. And I've helped other people with apps as they built them out. And I find that what most people really want to reach for is intent. You kind of imagine, oh, I've got a blotter, I want someone to click a button, and then I want a chart to pop up with that specific information, and so that's what I want to do. And so you're like, great, let me connect those two. And then the chart is like, oh, and when we get information, I also want to forward it to this other application. And so then they do that. And then that other application is like, you know what? When I receive information, I want to forward that to someone else. And then you do that. And this is a trap I've fallen in myself, personally, several times. So I just want to emphasize that sometimes this happens, but it might have just been easier to say, oh, I want all 4 of these apps may want to talk to each other. Let's just have them all communicate in one go. And it makes your life a little bit easier. So this takes me to my steps for adding FDC3, because since I fall into this trap so many times, I really want to emphasize the first thing you do with FDC3 is you plan what it is you're going to do. You look at the apps you have, or the apps that you anticipate might be added, and you plan out what kind of interop you're going to have. And if you don't know what those apps are, then what you probably want to do is the least coupled form possible. You want to say, this app, this is a charting app. It's going to show an instrument. That's all I really care about. Let's just tell everyone else what instrument we're sharing, and we don't really need to worry too much. Let's not really sweat those details. Just what is the most obvious thing that's going to want to happen, and just leave it at that. Something that's with as little coupling as possible. And I just want to emphasize this because of all of the times I've fallen into this trap. After that, we want to make sure we identify our platform. That's especially important right now because historically, FDC3 has been about desktops, specifically just on your local machine, but we're starting to move more and more into the browser. So for the time being right now, you kind of need to focus, are we doing desktop, are we doing browser, are we doing both? Because it's just something that's going to matter. In the next coming years, I would expect that this is not going to be a concern, that all of the software out there is going to make it a lot easier for you to get to the point where you could be doing either and you don't really have to think about it. But right now, it is something you need to have in mind, so so we'll look at that a little bit more in detail, but just be aware that knowing your platform will matter. Then you initialize FDC3. I'm going to show you how to do that. It's really straightforward. It's either no lines of code or 2 lines of code. You call those methods that you planned out. You test to make sure it actually works, because obviously. And then finally, you write down all of the stuff you're planning on doing in what's called an app definition. And then at that point, you've pretty much got your FDC3 integrated into your applications. So let's all walk through an example of taking an existing application that already exists. We're going to look at AG Grid right here, and we're going to decide how we want to add interop methods in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is say, let's say someone clicks on one of these stocks, and when they do that, maybe we should broadcast that we just clicked on that stock. So you click on AT&T, you send out the instrument, I think T, and then everyone else who cares right now, they should all work with that same instrument. Just something straightforward like that. And then maybe also, if someone else broadcasts a context, maybe we should update ourselves. And so that we'll filter out to only the ticker symbol that matters because that was what was broadcast out. Let's just say that's what we feel like doing. That sound good for everyone? Great. now that we've planned this, let's identify our platform. If you're using desktop-based, smart desktops that support FDC3 will by default inject a global variable into your Windows applications. They do something different for Java and .NET. I'm not a Java or .NET programmer, not actually familiar with what that is, but it's in our documentation. Either way, for JavaScript applications, which is what I work with, global application. It's a global variable. And so that's just window.fdc3, and you just call the methods off of that. It's already there, and it was pre-initialized for you. If you're using browser-based, which has yet to be ratified, but will be ratified very soon, I want to say in the next week or month, something like that, what you just do is import get agent, and then you say window.fdc3 equals await get agent, parent, and then you just go from there with whatever you were going to do with window.fdc3. So you just have to create that global variable yourself, but that's really all it takes is just these 2 lines of code to initialize it yourself. So now I'm just going to exit the presentation, and we're going to live code something. So this is our sandbox. This is the Interop.io sandbox, which will just make it a little bit easier for me to show you guys what we're doing with FDC3. I'm going to open create an FDC3 app in a new tab. And this shows us a couple of different things. We've got, these are just example apps just so you can play around with FDC3 and see how it works. So let me just show you. I can go over here to this client list, and I can click a thing, and it brings up something in another app, the portfolio app. So I can go in my portfolio app and click whatever this is, and a chart pops up that tells me some fun facts about it. And that's great. That's kind of the workflow we want to see. We want to see a little bit of change of context or being shared between different applications, maybe not even made by the same person. So I'm just going to, that's what we want to achieve ourselves. I'm just going to close these because I don't care about them anymore. And I'm just going to move you over here because I don't care about you right now. And I don't need docs because I know what I'm doing. Famous last words. And here is my locally hosted application. This is just AG Grid. I went to the AG Grid website. They've got demos. I downloaded finance/TypeScript, and this is what I got. Literally done no other code besides just this. So I'm going to take my locally hosted application, copy and paste it, and I'm going to add it here, and I'm going to call it my grid, and load it. And voila, my grid is right here. The magic of modern web development is it's going to automatically reload as I go through this development. So let's see. First, what we want to do is have it so that when you click something like this other chart should update. Doesn't do it right now. Great, let's go to my code, and I'm going to go up here. So on row clicked is the AG Grid command. It's just the AG Grid config for whatever function we want to do. So we see I want to have my row clicked, and then I want to broadcast an FDC3.instrument with the ticker symbol that AG Grid is storing. Great. So I'm just going to save that. It'll refresh over here, and I click it, and nothing happens because they're contexts. And I'm going to go to my channel, and I'm going to go over to this channel, and I'm going to click this, and I'm going to click this, and voila. It moves over here. So I can click an item over here, and then the context will appear over in the right, which is very exciting. But let's test it in a more straightforward manner. Let's look at the JSON that actually comes across. So I'm going to go over here. This is the FDC3 workbench. It's provided by FINOS to help you test your applications. So I know that I'm sharing context. That context is going to be a little packet of JSON. I want to make sure that JSON actually comes across the wire. I don't want to have a chart or any other particular other application that I know works with it. It's just nice to have something that'll work with whatever it is I'm using. So that's what the workbench is for me. First, instead of joining channels using this UI, I can also join it using just a command. It's called .join channel. They're named very obviously like this. And so I'm just going to join the channel that way. Be advised, if you are working on any applications that require using channels, users can choose the channels, but you also as a developer can decide that you want to have control over those channels. You can also have control over private channels. If you don't want just anyone to be able to join a channel, you want to have very specific control over who is on that, you can also do that as well. Right now, we're not going to get into those weeds, but just be advised that is power you have in your control. So anyway, I'm looking at this channel. We're on FDC3.channel.1. And I'm going to add a context listener. That way, when I click on the application in a grid, I can see what's going on. So I'm going to add a context type for instrument and add listener. And hopefully this will happen, except that it is not because I've now filtered this thing, and I shouldn't have done that. Let me just go comment out this code that I was testing earlier, because that always happens. Let's go. I'm going to click this. Yay, it did it. Anyway, so we got AT&T came across the wire, comes through as this instrument right here, and I can see where that information came from. Now, you may be wondering, where did that come from, though? Where did the information in this JSON actually come from? So for those of you who really love your debugging in JavaScript, because it is my favorite trash fire language for trash fire people like myself, let me just open up the console. And whenever I row-clicked anything, I just console log the information that was loaded. So we can see here, type equals FDC3.instrument. That's something I hard-coded because I know that I am sharing an instrument. And then I also grabbed the name, AT&T Incorporated, and just put that in here because it feels nice to do. I literally don't know what it does if I don't have that, besides I get red squiggles in TypeScript. But besides that, I don't know what happens without it, but it makes me feel good. And then I'm also going to add id.ticker. Be advised, you don't have to just say ticker. You can say QSIP, you can say ISIN, you can say what the other letters are. I don't know what those other letters are, but you can say all those other letters, just in case different applications want different kinds of letters to look up stock stuff. But yeah, ticker, that's what I'm going to use right now, ticker T. And we can see that that context came across. I assume the chart also updated AT&T. It did. Good job. Good job, everyone. We're all doing what we want. So that is one way of broadcasting context across, and we're double checking that that works. Now let's go to the second step we were going to look at, which is listening for context, which already shot me in the foot earlier because apparently I didn't plan clearing from my listing. Probably should have done that, but I didn't. So we're going to save that and update things. Yes, it is now listening for context. So now that I have my grid listening for context, how do I test that it can actually hear the context that's broadcast? Well, I broadcast a context. So we go to Microsoft, and let's broadcast just instrument Microsoft, and I'm hoping the ticker will filter to just MSFT, and it does! Yay! I love it when it doesn't blow up in my face like earlier. So we have the Microsoft ticker symbol, and that's just your that's just the simple process. I broadcast something, I made sure it broadcast from one way, I'm listening for something, and I made sure I could in fact listen to it. This is just straightforward working with contexts. So let me go back to my presentation from current slide. Is that seeing everything? Okay, great. So we have FDC3. We got all of our app working. It's doing the stuff we planned it to do. Now what's the last step we need to do? App definitions. We write down in a JSON config exactly what it is this app is, what it's doing, what kind of interop methods it's interested in. Let's start with just the basics. We need to give it a name. That name needs to be unique for everything else. Like just needs an ID, obviously, so that we know what apps we have. I like to give it a title. I don't know if that's required, but I personally feel like it's required. I like nice display names. What type is it on the web? Just so we all know that we're dealing with web technologies here. Details, where it's located. Great, you know, table stakes. And now the real fun part, interop. So here we're listing user channels, and that this particular application will use user channels as opposed to private stuff. We're only going to use the public things. And we're going to broadcast FDC3.instrument, and we're going to also listen for FDC3.instrument. Now, I do not actually know if FDC3 requires you to do this. I like it. I think it's a nice best practice. I think it's good whenever I see PRs come through and people are changing things, that when they change things in app definitions, it gives me that sense of like, I know where we're going with this. We've broadened or we've collapsed the scale of what we're working with. I just personally like that. But I don't literally know if it is required. It is required for intents, which we're about to get to, but I just personally enjoy doing this. But that's really all I have to do. This appd right there and the apps that we've already done, I can upload that. That's done, it's good, it's working, and it will incorporate with any other FDC3 stuff out there. But I keep talking about intents, and I keep talking about how I don't like using intents because I keep forgetting how to do stuff with them. Let's look at intents and just take a brief detour here. So intents differ from context because they're more of a workflow thing, whereas contexts help keep everyone in the same channel all on the same page. This can help you do more workflows, but there are a lot of technical limitations you should just be aware of when you get into them. So for example, an intent is sending to exactly one application. You're going, I go from saying AG grid and I want it to specifically open the chart and I don't want anyone else to know about it. I want precisely one application to work with it. One of the benefits of that is that precise one application doesn't actually have to be open. We could do this with applications that are already closed, and so it doesn't matter if they have a chart. If you are really, really certain a chart needs to come up at this exact moment, you just pop the chart up, and you call a view chart, and then it will actually open for you. It will also fail if there is nothing that can handle a view chart event. You'll get that error, screen. You'll get that error message come back, and so if that's a thing you wanted to know, if you really need to make sure that a chart is shown, you can also see if charts aren't being shown because you're getting that error message. Whereas a context will just send information out into the void, and it's not particularly concerned if anyone received it. That's not really what it's doing here today. It's just letting people know whether they're there or not. Intents care just a lot that exactly one application uses this with those limitations. But in order to make that happen, in order to make sure that one app is doing it, that app has to exist. You have to tell it which apps can in fact support view chart or any other particular intentions. So your intentions, pun intended, must be explicitly listed in the appd, and this is why I hate it so much. It's very important, it's very useful, I understand all of that, but it bites me every single time. Every single time I have to do a view chart, I don't list it, and then it doesn't work, and then I spend 20 minutes pulling my hair out and then complaining to Chris because he's on the FDC3 stuff, he knows things, why did this happen to me? And he's like, did you check the obvious? No. No, I never did. So it will bite you over and over again. Keep this in mind. Is my entire grudge against intents because of this? Yes, it is, but that's not important right now. Also, as a fun fact, it doesn't care about channels. Your users don't have to care about channels. You don't have to care about channels. Channels do not matter to intents at all. They're just doing their own thing separately from channels. But I like channels better, except for times they bite me because I wasn't paying attention to the colors. Anyway, so if you are having all of this, because the appd is so important for your intents, what do they need to look like? Just really straightforward. We had user channels that say we're broadcasting for FDC3 instrument, and we're listening for FDC3 instrument. So when we have intents, we can say we raise, instead of broadcast, view chart. And the kinds of context we care about for view chart, which would be FDC3.instrument. Because if you're raising view chart for, I don't know, other stuff, it's not really relevant to us. We only want to care about instruments right now. That's all we're dealing with. And we will also listen for, in this case, view instrument and what those contexts are. So we can limit here what we're raising, what we're listening for, just to let the desktop agent know. And that way, when any other application says, hey, I want to, I'm raising a view instrument for this context, it knows that your application and all the other applications can handle that particular thing. They can throw the errors, they can know what you're doing. So it does really matter for intents that we put this in the appd. If I have not emphasized that enough, it will bite you. Anyway, so how does that differ? Instead of going through and showing you the code, we're just going to really quickly show you this in the slideshow. Broadcasting, we've got window.fdc3.broadcast. We already showed you this. This was how we were sending that context from AG grid to the chart and to the workbench. And so it's broadcast. Raising, if you don't care about the intent specifically, because you can just say raise any particular intent for anyone who can take an instrument. I don't care if it's view instrument, I don't care if it's view chart, I don't care what you're doing with it. Here is a context, and then honestly it's the user who will decide what they want to do with whatever it is they just clicked on. Raise intent for context, it's literally the same command. You're just changing the method name and you're just handing the exact same JSON. It is that straightforward. And then if instead of wanting to do it for that general intent of whoever wants to do anything with this ticker symbol, if you want to say specifically I want a view chart, not view instrument, not view news, not view quote, not nothing, specifically view chart, then all you do is add the phrase view chart to raise intent. And that's really the only difference. It's really straightforward methods here. And I just want to give a hats off to the FDC3 team for really nailing down exactly how to get these APIs as nice and clean, as intuitive as possible. Finally, if you want to listen for intents, we already showed you how to add a context listener where you're just saying, I'm listening for FDC3.instrument, and then I just updated my list in AG Grid to only show that stuff for that instrument. I listen for an intent. I specify which intent instead of which context. I'm specifying I want to listen for view instrument. I get the context. I do exactly the same thing. The methods are fundamentally the same process. It's just slightly, you're just calling a slightly different method with that just slight different piece of information. So it's all very consistent and very easy to use. I highly recommend FDC3. It's very easy to get up and running with it, and clearly didn't even take 30 minutes to get us running. So, with that whirlwind tour of getting started with FDC3, does anyone have any questions? Okay, so are there any ways to diagram out how all the different applications talk to each other, or more broadly, have some kind of insights into what communications are happening across the applications for the sake of troubleshooting? So that would not exist strictly within the FDC3 standard, and I think that would be up to the individual desktop agent, which is implementing the FDC3 standard. It'd be up to those individual desktop agents to provide you either that diagram or that kind of insight. So I can take a brief moment to put on my company hat. I work for interoperability, which is a desktop agent, is an implementer. We have other excellent implementers of desktop agents out there whose names I guess I won't mention, but they exist. And I don't know what they do, but I know what my company does. And one thing we have is an interop viewer that comes as a developer tools. And so you can see what information is coming from which application and what the exact payloads of a lot of that information is. I believe if you have private channels, you have to know those private channels for security reasons. But we do have the ability to get you those insights into what exact context is going across the wire. That way you don't necessarily need to use the workbench. I am not aware of any diagrams to show you how those pieces would fit together. But honestly, that feels like if you just collect all the appd entries together, which the desktop agent certainly can do, being able to say these things are all in the same context, these things support the same channels, these sort of things raise intents that can be listened for by these other things, that honestly feels like a very straightforward project. Like I could give that to an intern for a month. Like that kind of, that's the level of project I think we're looking at, which is because the appds are so good at providing that explicit information. I am not aware of my company providing that, but it feels like something that we could do. And if you think that you're interested in that, if anyone else feels they're interested in that, please stop by the FDC3 table and tell us about that, and we can see what we can do. Anyone else have any other questions about FDC3? Yeah, and the library is provided by FINOS, so you would be npm install at finos/FDC3. I believe right now it is version 2.1, and I think 2.2 is going to be ratified soon. Don't know specifically, but that'll be the plan. And then the Git agent that you saw was being imported, I would assume that comes out with 2.2. But we are in that little gray zone of like almost about to ratify, but like let's all get excited about it kind of thing. Yes, Chris, you want to elaborate on that? Yeah, okay. So Chris said that we have context type files are available with the FINOS FDC3 library, and you can use that. I especially love that in TypeScript because it gives me the red squiggles when I do ticker symbol instead of id.ticker all the time, and it reminds me that's not an acceptable term there. So anyone else? Any other questions? Yes. So in the sandbox that I showed, those would all be individual iframes, and I believe that's also how it. I believe that's how all of the browser-based desktop agents would work. And then IOConnect browser is specifically our product that hosts those within iframes. If you were looking at a desktop agent, like that's actually living on the desktop, you're generally those are. I would assume most of them out there are Electron apps, and so they would just bring up sort of browser views that are within Electron. But again, don't really know what others do. Yes, Chris?
And again, there's
yeah. And those are benefits that our product does specifically provide that goes above and beyond the standard. Not supposed to talk about stuff above and beyond the standard in this presentation, but there are things, and feel free to ask us about them if you are interested. Sir? The problem I have at this point is that I am a UI developer, and I like to make things pretty, and I like to work in JavaScript. And while JavaScript can go on the server, no one should do that. And the server scares me. I know the guys who do the server, they all have like big beards, and they care about cars. And I don't know anything about that, and it scares me. So I don't really know how the server side stuff works, but please come by FDC3 table and ask, and I'll find us someone who does know how the server-side stuff works. But I'm sorry, I just do front-end things. Ma'am, in the back.
Yeah. Is there any recommended data size on these FDC3 messages?
I would personally want to keep it as really small as possible. I know some people like to use the custom properties and then they'll just shove massive amounts of data. They're like, here's our full database, trace output, full data dump, let's go. I would probably recommend against that. I just personally prefer the decoupling of just sending the tiniest bit of information that the apps need to know and then going from there, because the more and more stuff you cram into those objects, the more it's going to rely on crazier and crazier things, and I think it's just going to be a foot gun for you. Like, don't get me wrong, I love JavaScript, I love me some God objects, but they have hurt me in the past a lot of times, and I don't want that for you. So, minimal as possible. Yes, sir? So I think that's going to depend on your individual desktop agent. So there are a lot of things that the FDC3 standard doesn't go into because that becomes the value adds individual desktop agents can provide. So there's not a lot on authentication, there's not a lot on database management, on logging, on and honestly, not that much on like, here's what you need, here's like encryption stuff you need to do. Here's like what you need to do for security. Like maybe there's stuff on the back end and like things the desktop agent's supposed to do, but again, back end scares me. So from the front end side, I don't think there's anything too prescriptive about that. It's gonna turn into what your desktop agent recommends for what you're doing, and especially what your platform is, what kinds of other things you've connected to it. So for example, if you're working purely on the desktop and everything's in the desktop and nothing ever leaves the desktop, I don't know what security concerns you would necessarily have, because anything that could get in there and that could break stuff, that could elevate permissions, all of that stuff, they'd have to be on your desktop in the first place. Like, you've already lost at that point, my guy. So but once we get to browser, obviously tons of stuff is going across the web. You have a lot of man-in-the-middle attack concerns. I defer to your desktop agent to make sure that you're doing all of that just the way you want to be doing. And your IT professionals will probably also have strong opinions on that. But yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, then I'll let you guys go. Thank you all for coming.